picks up a snake and is holding it, and it's like, look, I caught one, watch this, and it's reaching around trying to bite him, and it's like, Chris, that's a copperhead, throw that away.
Yeah, so I met this guy.
Yeah, so I met this guy.
And he's got some friends who are very,
let's say, interesting.
He's got some friends who are very interesting. You should totally listen to this.
Hi, this is Harry, and today we're going to meet Kurt Junger. Kurt's a very interesting fellow. Kurt began in the early days of biopharmaceuticals, became a stay-at-home dad, and is now a SCUBA instructor. So welcome to our podcast, number one. Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came through your journey to today.
Well, I was one of 6 kids to 2 artists. Grew up in a pretty chaotic household with a lot of wrestling and tumbling and that sort of thing. And I was born in 56, so we had a lot of time outside of electronics, given that there were like 3 TV shows on at the time that you'd actually want to watch. So we were, my brother, John, was really into snakes, had friends that collected snakes and bred snakes, and spent a lot of time out in the woods. And we grew up in suburban areas on the edge of suburbia where there were woods all around. So our spare time was hanging around in creeks and riding bikes down into abandoned farm fields with abandoned houses and putzing around there, going to the Missouri River, hanging out. A lot of free time. So I grew up liking nature, and brother sort of let me tag along a lot. I sort of admired him. So when it came time to go to college, like, I don't know what I want to do, but I like being outside, so I guess I'll get into biology. And I got into biology, not really thinking about what I was going to do after I got out or go to graduate school or any of that stuff, and graduated and got a job in a lab at the VA hospital with a Chinese guy that could barely speak English. Spent an hour every morning trying to figure out what I was going to do for the day, and then an hour in the afternoon saying what I did for the day. And it was pretty cumbersome. I had a friend that I went to school with that had moved down to Midland, Texas with his family. His dad had gone down there to run the GM finance department in Central Texas. So he called up one day and say, hey, my boss says there's plenty of jobs down here in the oil field. If you want a job, come on down, no interviewing, anything else. That's much better than fighting, understanding my boss. So I put in my notice and went to Texas, and I worked in a wireline company through the fall and winter and starting into the spring. And when they started telling me that it won't be long before you can fry an egg on the hood of your car, I decided, well, maybe that's not the place for me anymore. So I headed back to St. Louis and got a job at Washington University in a lab there, and worked there for 2 years before deciding there wasn't a lot of future in working at a low-paying job in a lab. And went to work for a pharmaceutical company, for Wyeth Pharmaceuticals. Did that for 9 months before realizing I hate this. I'm not the salesperson type, and it turns out that the guy I worked for at WashU's cousin had gone to work at Monsanto and starting up a fermentation lab and a biotech effort that Monsanto had started. They were looking for people, so I went and interviewed with them. Years later, I found out that between the fermentation people and the purification people, they were both looking, and I interviewed with them both. And years later, found out that the reason the purification people really wanted me is because I worked down in the oil fields with heavy equipment, and the whole pilot plant, the whole endeavor was to create biotech products, create procedures for them, and then scale them up into a pilot plant, prepare materials for clinical trials, and then release the materials for clinical trials and ultimately move it to production. So I worked there for almost 15 years. I started long distance dating with Ellen, my wife. She was in Kansas City working for Hallmark, and I was in in St. Louis working for Cyril at the time. Monsanto had bought Cyril and moved all their biotech into Cyril. We got serious and decided to get married, and we're figuring out where we were going to go. St. Louis wasn't a real good place for high-level women to find jobs. I could have gone to Chicago, but ultimately we decided that her career was moving forward pretty quick at Hallmark, and mine was pretty plateaued since I have a BS in biology, work in biochemistry, biopharmaceuticals, and there wasn't a lot of moving potential there. Ultimately, I quit my job and moved to Kansas City and became a stay-at-home dad. I did that until my daughter went off to college, Fiona. Somewhere probably when she was probably ninth grade, I decided that I needed to pursue my outside activities, and I had gotten into scuba diving in 1990 and decided to move forward with that. And I got assistant instructor rating and started helping out with classes and pool work and pool class work and classroom work there. Did that until like 2 years ago, and then got my instructor rating. So now I'm instructor. I mostly teach friends and family that are wanting to do it. The classes, the group classes or weekend classes, I like to do individual classes. So I tend to try to find people that want to get into scuba diving, and I can spend a ton of time with them and help them through, become good divers before they ever hit the ocean and have to contend with the elements there.
So, did you have any previously held beliefs that were altered when you started doing the scuba stuff?
Well, yeah, I've always been environmentally conscious, so and surprisingly, the scuba community, you'd think that most people are, but it's probably skewed toward there. But a lot of people are just your average person and never give it much thought, and they just want to go see pretty fish. And, so throughout the course of the training and interacting with people, I certainly try to educate people on the environment and trying to advocate for social policies that promote a more holistic view of the world, Earth. But, I developed those way back in the 70s and when I was in college, and probably earlier when I was out playing in the woods.
Can you think of a funny story or anything that happened? No names, please, but anything really funny story, situation that may have happened?
What immediately comes to mind, John sort of nurtured me in exploring the woods, and Carl, my brother Carl, and I we'd play hooky in the spring and take the day off, and I was a good student, played basketball. Carl was not a good student. They tended to pay a lot of attention to him because of that. So the two of us would, every spring, we'd take a day off when the weather was really nice and go out and hang out in the woods and walk the woods. And we get back to school. Next day, Carl would be in detention because he skipped school. and I just scoot along like nothing had happened. Nobody asked any questions, anything else. So that was sort of the benefit of not being a problem.
You weren't a problem all the time.
Yeah. Well, when I took Chris out snake hunting, and he turns over a piece of tin and picks up a snake and is holding it, and it's like, look, I caught one. Watch this, and it's reaching around trying to bite him, and it's like, Chris, that's a copperhead. Throw that away.
Quickly.
So.
Is there one main thing that you would like people to know about your field, scuba diving or environmental, or you want to pontificate on something?
Well, I tend to not like to preach, but it's the reefs have degraded, significantly since I started diving. They will continue unless we change something.
Okay. All right. Switching over to a little bit more global view. You have a favorite music genre?
I move. I like, the music I grew up with, 70s, variety of music there. I have really fond memories of Pink Floyd, hanging around in dorm rooms, listening to Pink Floyd and Jethro Tull. I listen to some Harry Chapin, but I like classical music. I get in moods where I'll watch classical music for a while or listen to classical music for a while. And Jimmy Buffett, I listen to a lot of that when I'm in the mood and it's a sunny day and you're feeling lighthearted, and it sort of takes me away into another world. It's just, his whole thing is creating a mood of carefree life and enjoying the moment. So
Cool.
I listen, and I go through phases. I'll listen. I like jazz. I like blues. So it depends on the mood.
Yeah.
I like, if you're on a road trip, I like listening to ZZ Top still, and that kind of stuff.
How about books? What kind of books do you like? What's your favorite?
I went through a phase of reading a lot of history in the history book club. Really liked probably my favorite, John Adams, who is, and I can't think of the author, McCulloch, I think. Who was that? McCulloch. I love that book. It goes through John Adams' life from a young man, and it's written like a novel where you're just totally engaged in it and sort of living it as you go. I think there's one scene where he talks about him and his son heading off to France to be the colony's representative to France, where he's leaving and they don't know if they're ever coming back. It's a 4-month journey to get there, and not every ship makes it. And it puts in perspective how life has changed between then and now. So, but he's really good. The LBJ series by Cairo, they were really awesome books, really long books, but really informative. There's one book that we read that's Into the West that's as boring as sin, but it's the story of the demographic movement of Western civilization into America, starting before the Spanish came up. And, fascinating amount of information there, but boring as sin. It actually sort of ended our book club because it was like we got halfway through the first book and it's like we can't read anymore because it can't be any more boring.
I'm done.
Interesting fact, like for instance, there's a African American civilization in Washington State that predates any other European entry into the country, and genetically they've isolated a group of people that are still around that were here before any Europeans were, and that had come across and interacted and interbred with the natives in that area and did fine. So just stuff like that was really interesting.
Yeah. How about visual art? What kind of visual art is your favorite?
My dad was a watercolorist, and we have a lot of his work in the house. And I like sort of impressionistic work that you can still comprehend. You can still read images into it and sort of interpret it. I don't like abstract that's so abstract that it's not that I don't like it, I don't appreciate it that much, but when it's so abstract that you just are looking for a mood, it doesn't really do a lot for me. So,
that's a good abstract thought. Speaking of abstract thoughts, if you were a kitchen appliance, what would you be?
That's a hard one. Well, sometimes I feel like I am a dishwasher because Ellen works full time and I do a lot of the cooking and a lot of the cleaning. So I do a lot of dishwashing. But personality wise, I guess probably maybe a blender.
And please tell me why.
Well, it's like science is taking a bunch of stuff, mixing them up, and figuring out something good to come out of it. And blender is sort of like that. You put in banana, you put in raspberries, you put a lot of different stuff in, and you come out with something different every time. So,
Which is a wonderful segue into my next question. So you're playing along real good. I appreciate that. What is your favorite food?
yeah, good food.
All of it.
I'm one of those people that if it's good food, I really like it. And there's a lot of things that I wouldn't want to get rid of in life. And we have recipes that we really love. Like we make this farfalle with pesto and shredded chicken and asparagus that we really love, with fresh made pesto with homegrown basil, and it's pretty tasty. That would probably be. We always go back to that. There's a lot of comfort foods, that chicken cordon bleu with peas and carrots and noodles with Parmesan. That's a favorite meal. We usually go to that when we want something quick and tasty and feels good.
Cool. If you could meet anyone from the past, who would it be, and what would you ask them or tell them?
That's a good question. I wouldn't pretend to know what to tell them. It would be, meeting Abraham Lincoln, any of the founding fathers, seeing their personality, having a beer with them. It's like Boston, toured Boston and went and sat in the stool that Benjamin Franklin was in, had a beer. Meeting any of those people would be pretty cool. I'll leave the political advice to another time.
Fair enough. What was your favorite age to be, and would you return there if you could?
Favorite age, I would say probably 30s, mid 30s, to when, I started scuba diving then, bought a boat then, started traveling a little bit more, had enough money to be able to do those things. And then, when I became a stay-at-home dad, raising Fiona was pretty cool. Total shift in lifestyle. I'd been working in science and working with things that no one had ever done before. So when you define a process, everybody wants to hear about it and is interested in hearing about it. And you get a kid, and every time you figure out what's going on, it changes, and you got to refigure it out. And no one wants to hear about what you know about your kid, because they all know more about their kid than you do. But it was neat watching a kid grow up, infant, to watching the mental development and the progression to personalities that we recognize as adults. So that was a great time.
Cool. Yeah. What word do you have trouble spelling?
Frankie.
Frankie.
Your wife would understand that joke.
Okay. All right.
When we were kids, we went on vacation with family friends, and the little boy's name was Frankie. They asked me how to spell Frankie, and I said Fruity. and I was in trouble for the next 3 days.
I'm sure that wasn't the first time.
Yeah.
So again, along those lines, if you could meet a 10-year-old you, what would you tell him?
Probably don't worry so much about security and do what you want. Follow your heart.
That's neat. And how would you define happiness, and have you found it?
Happiness is an elusive thing. You have moments of happiness and moments of not happiness and contentedness. I feel like I'm content. Sometimes I'm happy, sometimes I'm not.
Okay, as we begin to wrap up, what haven't I asked you that I should?
Maybe how I got into scuba diving, because it's different than how people would get into it today. But
You got the stage, go for it.
when I was a kid, there weren't a lot of shows on TV, and you got the signal that TV was going off the air at about 9:30. So you made an effort to watch the shows you liked, and I loved Flipper and Sea Hunt, and watched those constantly, whenever I could. And growing up in St. Louis, we were lower middle income, and vacations for us was getting 8 people and 2 dogs in a station wagon and driving down to Table Rock Lake. So the concept of the ocean was fascinating, and I always had that interest in getting into that because of that. When I had the opportunity and time and money to do it, I migrated there and actually made 2 of my best friends doing that.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Okay, so now it's your turn. Is there anything that you would like to ask me?
Anything I'd like to ask you?
And
So
you could say no. There's nothing you want to add.
what is no? I could have a ton of things to ask you because you're mother-in-law. I'm trying to think which is the favorite one. So what floats your boat? What makes you get up in the morning?
That's a good one.
What is your central driving force?
I don't know where it came from. It could have been my father. It could have been one of my professors. I want to learn something new every day. When my head hits the pillow at night, it's like, okay, what did you learn today? And if you didn't learn something that day, then I don't want to say the day was a failure, but to me, learning something growing each day, that's my big goal, turn on, whatever you want to call it. My purpose, that's a good word. Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Well, thank you, Kurt, for sharing. Is there anything you'd like to tell our listeners about, like maybe a project you're working on, maybe something about the scuba place that you're with, or anything at all?
I do my instruction, and then I also maintain equipment out at Midwest Aquatics over there in Park area. Current thing I'm starting to do is lead trips. So people will sign up to go to different places, really all around the world, and so one instructor will go with that trip to troubleshoot and interact with the staff at the resorts or live aboard boats, and so that's a new facet of my career that I'm sort of excited to get into. And if anybody wants to go, they run trips to Egypt and South America and
Wow,
Red Sea, pretty much a lot into Indonesia, a lot into the Caribbean.
wow.
So my first trip's going to be to Cozumel next year, the first one I'm leading, and I'm looking forward to doing a lot more of that in the next 4 or 5 years.
So Midwest Aquatics, and ask for Kurt.
Absolutely.
All right. Thanks again, brother.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Talk to you later.
We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Interesting People I Know. Please follow or subscribe to be in the know about future episodes of Interesting People I Know. If you know of someone that I need to get to know and interview, please drop me a line at harrynogginsmusic@gmail.com. Thanks.
Yeah, so I met this guy.
Yeah, so